I am Eric Powell, a training coordinator with the Corporation for National and Community Service here in Washington, D.C., and I will be the host for today's webinar. I will also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session. Also joining us are the amazing people Jess and Indy from our partners at Education Northwest, who have helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You will also see them in the chat and the Q&A to help address questions you may have during the session. As with any webinar, we want to talk about the agenda. This session is really meant to cover a minimum of 3 things. We want to make sure that you reflect on your achievements as a Vista, because we know you've achieved a lot, and you're ready to keep continuing. Second, we want to make sure to point out specific sustainability activities that are realistic in terms of making them permanent within the organization so that they will live on well after you finish your year of service. And we want to make sure that you can get yourself ready to pass on the knowledge that you have and that you've learned so that another Vista member and the organization can keep it going and growing forward. You've already briefly met me, Eric Powell, and I will simply add that I did serve as a Vista member from 2006 to 2007 with Rhode Island Campus Compact, and then 2008 to 2009 as a Vista leader with Illinois Campus Compact. So I definitely have been in the wonderful shoes that you are in now. But also joining me are 2 wonderful people from the land of 10,000 lakes, also known as the great state of Minnesota. We have Sam Hartzell, and he's with the Minnesota Alliance with Youths as a Vista leader. He currently works to support 12 Vista members serving in educational equity and anti-poverty projects in the Twin Cities. Sam served 2 years as a Vista in youth programs and 1 year as a Promise Fellow prior to serving as a Vista leader. Also with us is Mao Tao, the out-of-school time literacy specialist Vista member serving with the Anoka County Library. She is completing her 2nd year of service with the library, continuing her project's work on expanding library resources. You will hear some great tidbits of information from them in a little while as they provide helpful insight along with their experiences with sustaining their Vista project. So, what do we really mean by sustainability? You've probably heard that word used a bit and wonder just how can you work towards sustainability? If you don't have a good working definition of what it means and how to actualize it, how can you make it work? Sustainability is the ability of a program or organization to continue to be responsive to the needs of the community and effectively engage community stakeholders. So many of you posting your comments in the chat were spot on in terms of what you define sustainability as. In the Vista context, sustainability is connected to capacity building. You are working in all kinds of different ways to create, expand, or strengthen your organization's systems or processes and to engage and empower community members and organizational partners. The capacity you are building every single day helps to make program sustainability possible. So let's take a closer look. In general, nonprofit and community-based programs need 4 kinds of capacity to support sustainability, shown here as 4 legs of a stool. The 4 legs are program capacity, the ability to create programs that address real community needs. Second, communication capacity, the ability to tell your story effectively in order to engage and maintain support, such as marketing and outreach. Third is human capacity, which is really and truly the effective and empowered staff and volunteers in utilizing them to the greater good. And fourth, financial capacity, making sure to find and elicit sufficient financial resources from a diversity of sources. Just like a real stool, all 4 legs of the sustainability stool have to be strong to create program sustainability. A loose stool falls apart, just as an organization with a loose sustainability plan or one completely without a plan can also fall apart. And as you can see in this image, connecting and strengthening these 4 legs of the sustainability stool are engaged community members and stakeholders. Their support is crucial to sustainability. They are the ones that hold it all together. So, the theory of capacity building leading to program sustainability sounds good, But does it really work in reality? In 2010, a large-scale study from Vista looked at Vista projects after the Vistas were gone, and it found, in fact, that yes, the vast majority of programs supported by Vistas continued working to address the needs of the community after the last Vista was gone. And as you can see on the screen, one question we have related to that is, which leg of sustainability are you building up? Are you looking at the program capacity, human capacity, communication capacity, or financial capacity? We've opened up a poll on the right side of the screen, and we'll give you about 30 to 45 more seconds to choose. It's a quick poll. You can select all that apply. But we want to make sure we can get a feel for what kinds of capacity are you building through your day-to-day activities. And as we wait just a little bit longer for you to put in those final responses, I will add that when I served in the wee little state of Rhode Island, most of my service was focused on program capacity, followed closely by communication capacity. And a very critical element in the service I was doing was strengthening bonds with the community and stakeholders, which, as we said earlier, is the glue that really holds the stool together. So now that we've closed the poll, we'll wait a minute or two just to make sure we can tally the results. But it's always good for us to hear from the Vistas that are actually on the webinar where you actually focusing your time and energy in terms of sustainability, because a lot of you seem like you're towards the end of your service and have either started working on sustainability or plan to in the very near future. So the information that you provide us and the other Vistas through this poll can help think about other ways you can add different types of capacity to your sustainability stool and keep that stool strong for years to come. So let's see what our poll results tell us. Survey says, okay, so it's somewhat of an even breakdown. Most people say program capacity is the leg that they're most strongly working on, followed by communication capacity, then human capacity, and financial capacity. And one really quick thing I'll say before we move on is, if you happen to only select 1, 2, or 3 and not all 4, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing what you're supposed to. There are some projects that, depending on their sustainability stool and plan, financial capacity may not be an immediate concern because there might be more urgent needs around human capacity. So this just kind of gives you a good idea of, for all the 220 Vistas on this webinar, what it looks like people are most focused on. So as we continue, and we talked a little bit about the Westat study, as you can see on the screen, in the study that Westat did of Vista projects after their Vistas were gone, about 84% of Vista projects were still operating 3 years after the departure of the last Vista. That's pretty amazing, considering all the work that the Vistas developed and helped sustain for 3+ years. Also, more than 90% of those projects had fully or partially achieved their 3 most important project goals. And think, as a Vista, you are crucial to helping them achieve those goals, so you are part of that huge 90%, which is an amazing statistic. And in addition to that, you'll be pleased to know that project directors or staff from more than 90% of those projects reported that Vista members were critical or very, very helpful in achieving those project goals. So keep up the good work as you work to sustain your Vista project. We're going to move to another quick activity, and this will be a chat question. So if the chat panel happens to close on you, just go up to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and click on the chat bubble. But we want to know, as we've been talking about sustainability and the different types of program sustainability, what variables make a difference in Vista project sustainability? We want to make sure your comments are visible to everyone, so please be sure to enter them in the chat panel and not the Q&A panel further down the screen. Really, the question is asking, are there characteristics of the sponsoring organization or practices that the organization had in place before you went there? Are there resources that they put towards the project? Take a minute now to post your answers to this question in the chat. There's no wrong answer, but again, what variables make a difference in Vista project sustainability? So I see Paul eloquently said commitment by those taking over. People need to be committed to what they're doing and committed towards sustainability. Awesome. Victoria says host site staff buy-in, meaning that people at the organization have to buy in and be interested and really critical to wanting the project to succeed. Dimitriana says input from community stakeholders. Absolutely. Vista projects thrive on that because Vistas, as intelligent as they are, they don't have all the answers and they need help from the community. And taking a look at a couple more, there's more that talk about commitment, support from supervisors. My project has been going on for several years and they're continuing with the work. So a lot of you, which I appreciate, I see communication, an absolutely critical element. So it looks like a lot of you are experienced with having done some of these sustainability projects and also thinking about how your work in terms of how you are committed as a Vista to help the project succeed and communicate well. And just the last couple more before we move on, documentation procedures from Gary. Definitely important that you as the Vista document all that you're doing for sustainability so that the organization and the community can keep it going. And then finally, Michelle mentions funding streams, especially with nonprofits. Anytime you develop a funding stream or create a funding stream or even contact a potential donor, it's important to make note of that, but also try to maintain those relationships, you as the Vista, but also the organization, to keep that money coming in so that it can further sustain the project and the great work that you as the Vista and also the great work that the organization is doing. So feel free to keep those comments coming because it's not only helpful to us, but it's also helpful to you as Vistas to see other ways that you can make a difference in your community in terms of Vista project sustainability. So as you all hit on a number of the really important things that this report, again, from Westat found, it's really good that you've been focusing on this and thinking about how to sustain the project. In the study, the three most important variables cited were, in order of importance, the capacities, training, and dedication of Vista members. And you all already talked about dedication and commitment. And again, this is critical because the more that people are trained, the more they may feel dedicated to the task and feel valued to what they're doing. Also, it means that you are passing on knowledge through training. Second, the support of the project from the community at large, which you all touched on. The Vista program succeeds in large part because of input from the community. For your service to make a difference and an impact, the community must be involved because they're integral in so many ways, and your role as a Vista member is not necessarily to do things for people, but to offer guidance and support so that people can help themselves make the change and be the change. And finally, the centrality of the project goals to the mission of the organization. What good does the organization serve if it's working on and implementing projects that are contrary to its mission? As a Vista member, you also have an opportunity to let your supervisor know about concerns you have or things that you see out of place in terms of the mission. And as we talk about your role, in the big picture of sustainability, everyone has a role to play. Your organization and community partners are responsible for envisioning the future of the project and looking down the line to what the ultimate goal is. Creating an engaging community, and such as a community advisory board or similar stakeholder group to further involve the community. Creating and implementing a sustainability plan, as we've been talking about, and also orienting sub-site supervisors, the direct supervisors, and Vista members to the plan so that they all are aware of what's going on and can be part of it. You as a Vista member, of course, also have a responsibility to help build the capacity of your organization and community through the service you're doing and what's on your Vista assignment description, supporting sustainability through the specific activities in your VAD. You also have a responsibility to engage staff and community partners in or through your VAD activities, delegate tasks, and also solicit support where needed, and transfer the knowledge, products, and relationships that you develop so that after you're gone, whether you continue on into a year of service or pass it on to a staff member, that work is sustained and continues. And since all of you are currently in service, I know most of you, I believe, based on the information we got, are toward the end of service, but think about sustainability variables and sustainability roles. We want to know how can you begin to take action steps to implement what you've learned. As you continue to serve and move forward, you really want to identify what you can do now to work towards sustainability and not wait till the last minute. One thing you can do is take a much closer look at your specific VAD activities and apply what we call a sustainability lens to the activities. This simply means for each activity, you can ask 4 key questions to assess sustainability. Let's take a look at these 4 questions together. The first is, will I have to do this again? Chances are there will be some aspects of your service that are cyclical or that you may need to do again and repeat. How can you make what you're doing now adaptable for use again in the future? Well, let's say quickly for an example, you're doing a fundraiser with a silent auction. Part of your role is working with local businesses to get in-kind donations. Of course, we hope a Vista working on this would keep track of the businesses they've contacted with notes on whether they donated or not. But how might it be different if you knew you were not planning just one silent auction, but had several continuous fundraising events over the course of a year? Of course, the request is slightly different because now you have several opportunities for them to support your organization. So you want to make sure you keep track and document. The next question is, what circumstances could change? As we all know, circumstances can change in your organization or in the community. If they do, are there elements of your plan that can be adjusted easily? Can you anticipate possible changes and plan how you could adapt with what you've done so far? In our fundraising event example, are your in-kind donation target goals realistic? It doesn't make sense to have goals if they're not realistic and achievable. Are you relying too much on businesses who have a long history of donating? What if they are no longer able to donate? Are you seeking enough new business opportunities to make up for that loss and to factor in that change in in-kind donations? The next question is, could others get involved? Is your work organized in such a way that you could pass along some responsibilities to someone else? Many of you are recruiting and engaging volunteers in your project. So, how easy would it be for you to delegate parts of what you're doing to a volunteer or a team of them? For the silent auction we mentioned earlier, the example, you might break things down into an outreach role, someone who can find partners and solicit donations, another person who adapts a marketing role, who can advertise the event and advertise on social media, and maybe a third role, an event assistant, someone who works with the actual location venue, the setup, the takedown, and all the logistics. And finally, what happens when I'm not here anymore? Much as you might love what you're doing, which we really actually hope you do, and many Vistas do, you know that your service year will come to a close on a particular date. And after that, it'll be up to someone else to keep your project moving forward. So how easy will it be for someone else to pick up where you left off? Would someone else be able to come in and plan another fundraiser and silent auction next year using the model that you created? Are your contacts, documents, data, and reports well organized, accessible, and easy to understand? And have you written down instructions for what you did and how you did it? These are all critical questions for you to think about as you continue your year of service. So here's a brief look at what a VAD activity assessment might look like for our fundraising event example with a Vista member who is gathering in-kind donations for a silent auction. You can see that the person has reflected on each of these questions of the sustainability lens and added a possible action item to help ensure this activity is sustainable. Take a moment after this webinar to do the same with your VAD activities. Moving on to another quick chat activity, we know that many of you have been serving for months and are nearing the end of your service, which means that hopefully you've already started thinking about what you want to do to sustain your project. So the question for you is, what sustainability activities have you already started at your site? Again, please enter your ideas in the chat box. We'll read a few of them aloud, and we want to see how everyone is managing with sustainability and what they're starting to work on. More information about communications from Tanya and Kylie about making sure there's instructions on how to communicate and who they've communicated with. Sarah has set up a database system. Wow, they're coming in really quickly, so it's hard to read them. I see someone talked about taking this webinar. It's their second day of service. Congratulations, Mary. Well, that is working towards sustainability, and even though many Vistas on this webinar are nearing their end of service, sustainability is something that is critical to think about at the beginning of service towards the future. Starting a continuity plan, creating binders full of instructions and events, building a curriculum for a 26-week job club, ESL class. A lot of people talking about creating documents, making sure to take notes, creating a social media calendar, creating guidelines for social media posting, marketing materials. All of these are really, really critical because, again, it's not just useful for you and your project to sustain the project, but it's also good information for you later on after Vista when you look for a job and you can talk about some of the stuff you've done in your resume. And the final few that I'll quickly mention are people talked about developing a process for volunteer acquisition and recruitment that lives on, having small trainings with existing staff so that they know exactly what you're doing and how to do it after you're gone, and then also speaking with current volunteers to see what resources they're lacking and what they would like to see in the future. You as a Vista may not have all the resources to give them, but you can at least point them in the right direction and show them what you've learned and do knowledge sharing. These are awesome, awesome examples. Keep them coming. We're going to move on to the next slide, but please keep posting these in the chat as you think of ideas as what you're doing towards sustainability at your service site. As a Vista member, the most important contribution you can make to sustainability is ensuring that the specific capacity you are building is effectively transferred and will be carried forward by others. In the Vista program, we define capacity building as the transfer of knowledge, products, or relationships. No matter how much information you gain, and we know that you've gained a lot of information, how many deliverables you create, or how many relationships you develop, if you do not intentionally pass it on to others in your organization or in your community, your work as a Vista member will not contribute to sustainability. We're going to spend some time with each of these categories and hear from our fabulous guest speakers in a moment about the strategies that they have used. So Sam, we'll start with you in providing some insight into your experience around sustainability. Take it away, Sam.
Thank you, Eric. I'm really excited to be here today with all of you and to talk about sustainability. So as Eric mentioned, I'm currently the Vista leader for the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, and I have a couple of years of experience before that serving as a Vista. So as we talk about these questions of sustainability, I've done it a couple of times, and I've received sustainability materials from my predecessors in my roles. And every time I step into a new role, as I'm sure you found in your experience as Vistas, it was so helpful to get that material from those prior folks who had been in that role. And then as you kind of look to concluding your term of service and creating additional material for folks who are coming in to take over from your time as a Vista, it's really great to think back on like what you received, what was helpful to you, and then to kind of replicate that. So in my role as a Vista leader this year with the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, we're actually looking to bring in a new Vista leader. So a lot of what I'm doing now is creating content that will be helpful to that person. So I think one thing that I would mention that was really helpful to me was receiving kind of some generalized tips of lessons that my predecessor learned. So one thing that we've done this year is create a pretty simple 2-page document for the new Vista leader, and this is really transferring the knowledge that we gained this year to the next person through 2 pages, pretty simple content that's easily read and is pretty diverse in like the kind of lessons that we learned. And those vary from how to find housing as a Vista member, how to find resources for EBT support for Vistas, and really a lot of different details on like technical support that we learned for Vista members, as well as ideas about how to handle conflict as a Vista leader and things like that. So that's something that we felt was valuable, really to create something that was simple enough that the new Vista leader could look at that and learn from our experiences without overwhelming them with too much information. So I think that's something to bear in mind as you're creating content, is that oftentimes new Vistas are super smart and they're super on board and they have all their own ideas, and they need that guidance from you. They don't necessarily need to learn everything because there's a lot to learn, but that kind of direction that you can provide them through the materials you create can be really helpful.
Great, thank you, Sam. That was wonderful, and I know we'll hear a little bit more in a few minutes, but that was a lot of really good information. And Mal, we'll turn it over to you for you to provide some insight into your experience in transferring knowledge.
Yeah, so just a quick bio of me. I am a second-year Vista, just like Sam, and I've been serving at the same site with the Anoka County Library. And some of my main responsibilities include assisting and helping with program planning, coordinating outreaches, and overall, like just expanding library services to underserved communities. And overall, I would say that my sustainability approach has really been to document and just reflect on my project goals as a whole, and overall maintain good communication skills with library staff and partners, as Eric mentioned earlier, and Sam very well put together. And so I guess just talking about transferring knowledge and skills, you know, Sam said it really well. You know, one of the main things that I worked on as a Vista is a green book, and this green book is considered our sustainability book. And so it has like all these important information about pretty much everything that you've done during your term of service. It has like program debriefs, things that you've worked on, projects that you've worked on, tips on what to do, tips to look out for, you know, future prospects, and also just like really good information on like potential contacts too.
Great. That was a wealth of resources, and as we said, we'll be sharing the resources with you after the webinar on the Vista Webinars page. But just in a quick summary, as Mal and Sam both give examples of transferring knowledge, as you know, it refers to the knowledge that you have gained about community resources and assets. You've probably already identified community resources and the results that can be documented and passed on through a written report, a spreadsheet, electronic directory, slideshow, or many other means. You want to make sure to work with your end users or the people who are ultimately going to be impacted to identify a format that will be accessible and useful to them. And very quickly, specifically, there are some ways that you can help transfer the knowledge you've built. As Sam and Mal said, one example is creating an asset map or other ways of cataloging and representing the assets and capacities that you have identified in your community. Another idea that they both talked about is documenting and keeping track of information, making a stakeholder analysis for others to build on so that the organization knows who their stakeholders are and who the most important people that are that keep the organization going. And then finally, you can also make presentations to organizational leaders and staff that connect you with your work, and they connect the work to the organization's goals, effectiveness, and sustainability. Sam and Mal, do you have any other tips you'd like to add about transferring knowledge before we move on to transferring products?
I could speak a little bit about the community needs assessment report. You know, one of the first things that I did when I first started my year of service was to conduct a community needs assessment. And, you know, this is a really great tool because it helped me to understand what needs and resources existed in the community, as well as just kind of seeking out who our potential partners are in the community. And, you know, after doing this, I wrote up a report and shared it with library staff, and it provided very good information on just what it does exist in the community. And logic models are also another really good tool. I use logic models to provide a more in-depth look at planning for programs and to make sure that our programs reflect intentionality and that they would be sustainable in the long term. And so these are some good ways for me to share with my organization about the local community, and it also makes it easier for staff to recreate the programs too.
Thanks, Mal. And before I turn it over to Sam, I just had a really quick follow-up question that I think might be on the minds of some of our Vista members is, we talk about community needs assessments, but do you have a quick overview as to how you got started with that? I know sometimes when we talk with Vistas, they want to do a community needs assessment, but they're not sure how to get started or who to talk to. Do you have a tidbit of information that could help them with that? Community
needs assessment, they can be a bit of a challenge to start off with. So when I started it, I actually had to do 3 of them separately because I worked with 3 different branches. But, you know, I just did like a lot of internet research and I referred to, there are some really good like nonprofits that have guides for how to properly go about conducting a community needs assessment. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are some really good resources out there.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Sam, we'll turn it over to you.
I think that as far as transferring knowledge goes, one other thing that was helpful to me when I served my first year as a Vista member at a small youth program that was focusing on building wooden boats to help young people learn, I was serving as their grant writer, so we really did create kind of a list of grant schedules and timelines for like viable funders and foundations so that the next Vista in that role would know who to apply to and when to apply to them for potential funding. So that was something that was, I think, helpful to that person as far as transferring knowledge of kind of the grant schedules and who was out there to provide funding to that organization.
And I know a lot of our Vistas write grants or do things around fundraising development. So a quick question for you, Sam, is do you have any, off the top of your head, quick ideas as to Vistas who are interested in helping the organization or who are told that writing a grant is part of their VAD and activities? Any tips you have that you've learned from writing grants in terms of what you suggest they put in it? Or I know they're very specific to each grant organization, but any overarching tips?
I think that one thing that's helpful to remember is that a lot of times if you're serving in a Vista role as a grant writer, a lot of times what's helpful is that as you create grants, you're really building on prior grant work, prior grant language. So a lot of times if you're serving in a development role and you're working on grants, it's really helpful to make sure that you keep all of the content that you write, because that's something that will be valuable to staff in the future, to future Vistas, to be able to use the language that you were creating and refine that in the future, because a lot of times different grant applications, even with different topic areas or different requests for funding, they're going to use similar kind of language. And a lot of times it's helpful to have kind of contributed to that database, that library of grant language that the organization has, by making sure that you keep that. Keep the work that you did for each grant. Don't just send them out into the blue and say goodbye to that language, but store it, keep it in a place where it can be found by folks who are involved with the development and grant writing at that organization. So I think that's something that I definitely found in my role as a grant writer a couple of years back. And then at that time, using stored language was really helpful to me, kind of learning my way in that position. So I think that's one tip that I had from my experience.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I like how you said content, because it actually very much relates to our next topic of transferring products. In terms of products, we mean, of course, what you've created in terms of content. It could be tools, it could be templates, resources, training materials, actual tangible things that someone else will have to use or engage with. When creating products, start with the end user in mind, as Sam and Mao had just said, or even better, involve them in the process. Make sure that they are set up in such a way that someone else can find them and use them. A couple of other tips: design and carry out training for those who will use your products. Some of you in the chat already mentioned you're already starting to draft training for staff and other volunteers, or work with them one-on-one to ensure that they understand and are comfortable with using what you've created. Make sure that they get some hands-on experience and be prepared to adjust your work if needed to make it more user-friendly. You can also create step-by-step guides to help others carry your work forward and build on it, like event planning guides, user guides, or process guides. Sometimes our work seems very simple and you think, oh, I don't need to create a process for that. But not everyone who follows behind you will know how easy it is, so it's important that you follow that step-by-step guide process. And of course, one of the most important things you can do to ensure the sustainability of your work is to assemble your products and store them in a way that will make them accessible after you are gone. That may mean a physical binder, as some of you have already done, or it might mean electronic files if that's what your organization does. If there is not already a shared drive or online storage for your organization, you can explore free resources online, such as Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, or Box. Be sure to help the people involved get comfortable using shared electronic files before you leave, and be sure to use certain tips like labeling files with names that make it easily recognizable. And of course, you want to make sure that the electronic files and resources are not tied to an account that will disappear after you leave. And don't forget to pass on any usernames or passwords others might need to access those files. So now I'll turn it back over to Sam and Mao, and I'll start with Mao this time. What experience do you have transferring over the products that you've created?
Yeah, so for that, I have a couple of email templates that I use, and These are really useful for me when I'm sending out emails to potential partners or when I'm trying to coordinate like outreaches. Some other methods that I found to be really useful are project plans. And there's a lot of like different templates and different ways that you can go about creating and using a project plan, but mine are relatively simple, but there are great ways to just detail like action steps or activities that you need to do before leading up to like a programming or an outreach event. That way, when it's time to start planning a program or coordinating outreaches, you know, it's a very good way for staff to look back and see what's required and what things should be done leading up to the event. And then lastly, you know, you could have like a lot of different ways of like transferring products, but you know, if you don't have a good way of sharing that knowledge, that makes it a little bit more difficult. And so one of the things that I'm working on right now is I'll be leading staff trainings on the Vista project, and this training will be available for my organization's staff, and it'll be covering like resources and best practices for like sustainability, and overall just like a debrief of everything that I've done so far and how the staff can pick up from that and continue the work that I've done during my Vista project.
And Sam, I know you've done some similar things but have some different tactics on that. I'll turn it over to you to give your experience on transferring products.
For sure. So I think as I was looking through people's comments on variables that come up as far as the sustainability is concerned, I love that a lot of folks were mentioning guides and really leaving a paper trail. And that's certainly something that was true from my experience as a Vista. Again, it's the same organization I mentioned before, where I was working with a lot of systems. So there were a lot of like databases and like email systems and just kind of complicated systems that we were using that my inheritor would have to pick up and use as they took on that service position. So one thing I did was I did create like a guidebook, and that was really a manual to kind of detail how to use different databases and email systems and how to, for example, one thing that I learned a year later when I spoke to the person who took over from me after they were wrapping their year, they said that the most helpful thing they got from that pretty hefty document I made for them was just a section on how to do HTML coding for the e-newsletter. So you can be surprised by what is really helpful to people, and sometimes as you're trying to think of all the different pieces that you want to share with the next Vista, it's sometimes surprising that like maybe you just had to do the coding piece. They're really kind of hard to learn. Starting out parts can be most helpful to folks. And then I also included like, you know, you can take screenshots of systems and like show folks how to use them. That's helpful because these are just complicated systems, and otherwise if you don't create that for them with like these product systems, then the staff will have to teach them. So it can be helpful to create that kind of thing. And then I think Mao is spot on with creating like communications templates. That's something that we're doing a lot now as in my role as a Vista leader, is we're really trying to store all the templates we've done for various communications and emails throughout the year so that the next person can just kind of work off of those. And that's a really, really great point from Mao that I really encourage everyone to bear in mind.
Thank you to both of you, and I will quickly echo communication templates and things of that nature, not just because it makes it easier for the person behind you to pick up after you're gone, but also it helps keep a relatively consistent message coming from the organization so that stakeholders, new or existing, are very familiar with the wording and are used to seeing a certain type of format from the organization, which actually ties in very well. See, you guys are perfect. It ties very well in with transferring relationships, because communication, of course, is a product, but it also is communicating to a person or entity in your building and cultivating relationships. So we're going to transition now to talk a little bit about if you're building relationships. It's, of course, critical that you do not wait for the last minute to think about transferring them. And it's a little bit more difficult to transfer a relationship than it is a product that's actually tangible. So whether you're at the beginning of a year of service or at the end, you should definitely be thinking about how to lay the groundwork for transferring the relationships. It's very important that you be intentional from the start about building relationships in such a way that they are identified with the organization or program, not just you as an individual. Here's a few tips that can help. Be sure to make clear that you are representing an organization in the relationship, not just yourself, so that stakeholders make a clear connection and know that they will work with others in the future. Even if another Vista will be coming on board, a staff person may need to bridge the gap. In any case, you definitely want to ensure the relationship is identified with the organization or program. You can always have someone from your organization accompany you to meetings and make introductions. Feel free to set up meetings with key individuals and someone from your organization specifically to build the relationships and keep those going. And as you do end your year of service and come to a close, you should prepare key contacts for your departure and make sure they know and feel comfortable with staff members or another Vista and know how to contact them. And one thing that Sam and Mal alluded to and brought up is, in addition to that, as you're leaving, if you've already made good relationships with people, it would be a good idea to email those contacts and let them know that your year of service ending and put in there who the next point of contact is, so it also helps with sustainability. And if you are building relationships with organizational partners, you can work with them and staff of your organization to create written memoranda of understanding or memorandums of agreement, articulating the partner's roles and responsibilities in as much detail as possible. And I know based on their experience, Sam and Mal both have worked on and are currently working on transitioning relationships and the way those relationships were built. So Sam, we'll have you start in talking about some of the things you've done to transfer relationships to another person at the organization or in the community.
For sure. So in my role as Vista leader, I think I'm going to take this question and kind of move it towards internally versus externally with like staff at the organization. I was looking at again the variables that folks listed in the comment bar, and I noticed that like having a welcome and orientation was mentioned. And I think that's a really important thing, because a lot of times when you're looking to transfer the relationships that you develop in your organization, these really critical relationships that help the Vista project succeed and are so foundational to the absolute success of the project, it's important to create situations and moments where, as the next Vista is stepping into the role, they're meeting with people and they're really having the opportunity to connect with staff members who are going to be impactful to their service. And a lot of times it can be really simple. It can just be, you know, have the Vista come in, there's a welcome sign, there's a balloon, there's a sense that they're, you know, welcome in the space, and then have them maybe have set up meetings with different members in the staff who are important and really have those put in place before the next Vista comes in. So there's an opportunity for them to meet with people who they're going to be serving with and working with. I think that's really, really important. And it can be really simple. It doesn't need to be really, really super complicated. It can be an opportunity to get like coffee with somebody. But really that kind of human contact point, that human touch piece, where there's this opportunity for it really to be face-to-face, that's really important. That's what I've found. And like, again, just even like a sign, a welcome sign. You step on your first day and there's a welcome sign with your name on it. That means that the organization knows you're there, that they care about your presence, that you're important, and then that means that you know that you're going to be listened to as a new Vista as you go kind of meet different people that you're going to be working with and serving with. So I think that's something that I found in my experience was really impactful for me, is really just that initial point of folks coming in and having the opportunity to meet with people they'll be working with in the organization internally. They're the relationships that were created in the previous years of the Vista project, and make sure that there's that chance for the Vista to meet them and to really have the opportunity to get to know them. That's something that I think is important.
Great. And Sam, thanks for pointing out the welcome sign. I think that's a great way, especially of bringing someone new on board who you're transferring a relationship to, but it helps them to feel that they are not necessarily a new person, but maybe that they've already been part of the group and that they come in with a fresh start and really excited. So thanks for that point as people think about other ways they can transfer relationships. And I know, Mal, you also have some great experience around that, so I'll turn it over to you to give your experience.
Yeah, so just going off a little bit of what Sam was saying, you know, it is really important to make, you know, if you have like a new Vista that's going to replace you, it is really important to make them feel welcome and to, you know, get them to meet and visit with, you know, the new staff that they'll be working with or potential partners that they'll be working with. Because I know when I first started my first year of service, you know, having that experience, being able to meet staff was really helpful in creating like a really good working relationship with them. And I think overall it was just a really good way of making sure that we were able to communicate really well with each other in a sense. And then, you know, going back to what Eric was saying about staff involvement during meetings, that's also a really important aspect of being able to easily like transfer your relationships that you've created throughout the year. It makes transferring relationships so much easier. I mean, when I first started, you know, I work really closely with library staff anyways, and so really kind of from the beginning that I started my Vista year of service, there had already been like a lot of staff involvement. You know, if I was communicating with partners or if I was sending emails out, there was always a lot of communication with my organization staff. And so I think having that kind of build up from the very beginning really helped to make this transfer process a lot easier, because the great thing now is that a lot of our partners and people that we talk with, they're familiar with library staff, and so that makes it a lot easier. And also, again, to the last couple of months, my year of service is coming to an end, so I've also been sending out like goodbye emails, you know, just reaching out to our contacts. Many of them are teachers, so I try to make sure to send them emails before the end of the school year, but just letting them know about the end of my involvement and giving them a person of contact for the future, just letting them know like which staff member they can reach out to if they have any questions or if they want to create like a new program or new outreach initiatives.
You did a great job, Mal and Sam, earlier of talking about the second bullet on the screen, a clear point of contact for the future, making sure that the individuals know who to go to and just that the connection with the organization will be sustained. They still may want to maintain a connection with you after you're gone, but the transfer of relationships is making sure the relationship you've built professionally for the organization and for the Vista project is continued after you're gone, so that those partnerships start with you but continue after you're gone. And I appreciate that, because a lot of the things that Sam and Mal mentioned relate to resources that we have or that they've suggested, so we'll show you some ideas as a reminder of things that we've talked about. There are plenty of resources that, of course, you probably have in your repertoire or that you should check out on the Vista campus. And some of these include a project sustainability assessment that was really developed by a Vista leader, similar to Sam, as well as some additional webinars that transition your work to the next Vista. And on the Vista campus, there's also a lot of information, including a recording of the session that includes a template of the VAD assessment activity that we modeled in this webinar. So as you can see on the screen, there's a lot of resources, and there's also 2 external resources that you might want to check out. These focus on program and organizational sustainability, and on the screen they're the Center for Public Health System Science and the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole. You may know other organizations or systems that are helpful, and you can feel free to post those in the chat as we continue that your organization knows about or that you found online. But these are just some resources that Sam and Mal and then some of our other Vistas have mentioned as useful and things that can really help you succeed toward your sustainability program. So now we are at the end, so we're going to ask you to take a quick moment to share your feedback through the quick poll on the right side of the screen. We really do value your feedback and look at these to improve and create future webinars, so please be honest and open. How can we improve these sessions? What topics should we include in future webinars? We also take a look at that because, of course, these webinars are meant for you as Vista members to grow, know, and change. We, of course, want to thank you for your participation. We definitely want to give a huge shout out to Mal and Sam for taking the time and the energy to talk about their skills, experience, their wealth of knowledge, and what they've done in their past couple of years of service. And as they both transition out of service, we thank them for all the work that they've done and the resources and ideas that they've provided. And we know now that we've talked to you quite a bit, you probably have a couple of questions. So while the poll is still up, if you do have any questions, there's 2 ways to ask them. First, I know some of you have already started asking questions using the Q&A panel on the right hand of your screen, which is perfectly good, and we'll get to those in a minute. But I'm now going to ask our operator, Candy, to let us know how we can ask a question by phone. Candy?
Thank you. At this time, to ask a question, press *1. Please unmute your line and record your name only to be introduced. Again, for questions or comments, press *1, please. If you'd like to withdraw the request, you may press *2. Thank you. Please stand by for your first question.
So in the Q&A panel, I see there's a question in Mao. I will direct it to you, and Sam, feel free to add in, but this question looks like it's directed to Mao. And the question is, are there sometimes circumstances like Mao's where the Vista's project site elects or decides to keep the Vista member on for a second year of Vista service in order to continue the building of the program they've created? Now, do you want to share your thought about, obviously this is your second year of service, so the answer to that is yes, but if you have any thoughts about, I think the question is relating to, as the Vista finishes out their year of service, instead of them necessarily leaving and then transitioning it to a staff member, experience with kind of transferring that from one Vista year into continuing on to a second year of service, and the way you can further help with sustainability like you have in your project.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, so my Vista project, it is 3 years, and I was actually the second Vista for the project. So I came in during the second year, and I think just kind of doing everything that I did and being a part of it, you know, it kind of encouraged me to stay on for a second year, and my supervisor and my Vista site was very happy about that because as you all probably know, they heavily encourage that Vistas continue on for a second year because that is really when you start seeing the results of your work and what you've done to come to kind of a conclusion. And, you know, it was great because I was kind of able to see the end of the projects that I've worked on. And, you know, as far as like the transition process, like, you know, what I did, there wasn't too much of that because I knew that I would be continuing on anyways. But I just made sure that I continued to kind of document everything that I worked on because I knew that, you know, for my second year, it would be the end of the project. And so I just made sure to document everything that I worked on and just ensure that I had all the information that I needed that would be useful for the staff after I left.
Great. And Sam, I'll ask you, since I know you transitioned from a Vista member to a Vista leader, what did that transferability look like in the same context of, instead of just ending and passing it on to a staff member, you moved up to be a Vista leader to oversee 12 Vista members?
For sure. I mean, I've served at this point 4 years of national service, and I've been in, to this point, 3 Vista cohorts. And in each Vista cohort, there was absolutely times when folks would continue in the same Vista role and would continue into the second year at that host site. And I think it's a really cool thing when that happens because, you know, 1 year is a very long time, but also not that much time. And to continue in service into that second year lets you go so much deeper with the service work and really lets you see the efforts that you put into play in that first year really come to fruition and keep moving forward, as Mao said. I think that's a really cool thing when that does happen. I actually, when I did my first Vista year, I actually began my second term as a Vista member at a different organization. So I had a little bit of a different experience than Mao has had, in which I didn't really choose to continue at the same site, but I switched sites. And I think there's really a case to be made for both options. So I think continuing on in the same site you're at is oftentimes a phenomenally great choice because it lets you kind of continue to kind of build those relationships, continue in the work, and really go so much deeper with the work at that organization. And then maybe you might say, hey, maybe I want to go somewhere else and gain a different kind of skill set, learn different skills, work on different sorts of service projects. And that's what I chose to do. So I think it really depends on the person in my experience, but it's absolutely a very common thing that I've seen happen where folks would continue in the same site, and that's a really great question. And then there is, in my experience, has been I did kind of move up into the Vista leader role, which is that's a little different because it's, you know, you're kind of shifting the nature of the service work from one project to then supporting Vistas who are supporting specific projects. So I think that can be a really great way to take on like a leadership, kind of a leadership role and gain skills in that and really support a whole bunch of different folks doing service work. And then if you become the Vista leader of the cohort you're in now, your knowledge is invaluable. Like your knowledge of the host site that you have been at, your knowledge of your cohort's culture, of what is important to your organization is absolutely critically valuable to your organization if you were to choose to become a Vista leader as a second year. And that's great knowledge, and it really helps you work with the organization that you had been serving at and is a great idea, I think, if that's something that's useful to you, is to kind of move into that Vista leader role. But I think that a second year, I wouldn't recommend it to all people because sometimes it isn't a viable choice, but I think it can be a really wonderful thing to do, is to continue on to a second year of service, either at the same organization or at a different organization, or maybe as a Vista leader. So I think it's a really great question.
And briefly, as Sam and Mal said, when you think about sustainability, you definitely want to think about the decision to do a second year or potentially a third year is a joint partnership. It's your supervisor might want you to stay, but it's also if you are interested in staying too. So definitely have that conversation as you think about sustainability for your project. Before I get to a couple of questions in the Q&A, I'll find out, Candy, are there any questions on the phone?
We're showing no questions at this time. Again, for questions or comments from the phone, press *1, please.
So Whitney has a question, and I'll turn it to Sam or Mao, whichever one wants to provide feedback first. After 2 years of having a Vista and resource development, next year the site will not have a Vista and resource development. So who do I transfer or present my work to? We have a fairly small office, and I really don't want to put too much work on one person. So either of you have ideas in a case where they may not get a Vista or they may not get a Vista in that specific arena and what they should do? I can say one thing I'll quickly add while we see what other thoughts come in is, based on my experience, sometimes, Whitney, what the best thing to do is actually stemming from exactly what Mao and Sam said a few slides earlier, in that there may not always be a specific person to point someone to if it's a small office, or it may not be apparent who the best person is, but first work with your supervisor, because they might have a suggestion or an idea, whether it's someone at the organization, or they might have, some organizations have long-standing volunteers that volunteer with them 1, 2, 3 days a week that are not staff, but they're kind of part of the sustained community, so that volunteer might be able to take on some of the tasks. But as Sam and Mal said earlier, make sure that you are documenting everything, especially when it comes to resource development. You're probably writing grants, you're probably finding ways to raise money and develop other resources in kind and financial. So definitely document it, so even if there's a slim chance that when you leave there's no one to actually transition it to, at least if everything's documented from how you found the grants, what website you used, to who you've contacted, to what steps you took, at least that way when the organization does get someone in that place, it might take a few extra minutes for them to get up to speed, but at least you've literally laid the foundation and they can just go from there. Sam or Mao, did you have any other insight onto that before I move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I was just going to say that just to add on to what Eric said, you know, maybe working with your supervisor and just talking with them and trying to figure out, you know, like what their next steps are for that too, and try to figure out a way of kind of solving that issue. Because I do know that that is a little bit daunting, is that, you know, you're not really sure who's going to be transferring, who's going to be taking over what you've been working on. So I would just say that also just talk and work with your supervisor on that too.
And Sam, I think you were about to say something too.
Yeah, I would just echo what Mao and Eric have said, which is that particularly in an office that may be a smaller organization, a lot of times the service work of a Vista is really impactful and important to the organization in a small office. So it's certainly really worth it to work with your supervisor and to ask them, like, well, how do you foresee transferring that particular task load forward into the staff role, particularly with development work. That's so important that a lot of times there will certainly be some sort of person who can kind of help lift that or kind of transfer it to staff in the future.
And a quick follow-up question that Whitney asks is centered around Vista's plan all the sustainability. They work towards creating a binder, a folder, all this work, but there's sometimes a fear that the service site might see it and they either forget about it or set it aside and not use it. Some people have seen that happen with Vistas before or other staff before. Is there anything that you, Sam, or Mal can think of that the organization or that the Vista can do to help prevent that from happening? Because obviously if they're spending this time on sustaining the project, you'd like the resources to be useful. And I know you both talked earlier a little bit about how one thing to do to make it useful is to try to write these documents and step-by-steps in language that's useful for other people to be able to understand. We might use acronyms or lingo that makes sense to us, but if it's unclear or if it doesn't really make sense to the person that actually would be using it, then it might be more likely that they wouldn't use it as much because it's not as useful. But do you have any other tips as to how an organization can be more likely to use and sustain the binder that Vistas create?
And this is the operator. We do have a question from the phone if you'd like to take that.
Okay, Candy, we'll take that in just a second.
Thank you.
I can answer this one. I have a thought for this.
Go ahead, Sam.
I think that, so this is a great question because this is one of the most spooky things that can happen for Vista is you do all this work all year long and it means so much to you and it's important to the community you're serving. And the fear is that you finish your year and it goes nowhere. That's really, that would be such a loss, such a tragedy to see that happen. And I have seen that happen before and it's not something that is positive. So I think one thing that I can think of that can help you make sure that the content that you create is transferred to the incoming Vista member is to give it to them yourself. So you don't need to kind of stay away from the next Vista. You don't need to avoid them and like hang out in the shadows, cackling and like being like playing at strings or something like that. You can talk to them. You can ask that next person out to get coffee. You can give them a print off copy of the materials you want them to use. You can say, here's what my experience was. Here's some of the things that I think would be really useful to kind of look at as you look to continue this project. And so I think that's something that can really be helpful is to not shy away from the person who's going to be taking on the role, but really take the time to make sure that you can kind of cross over with them and spend some time with them so that you can make sure that they're aware of the things that you would like them to be aware of. Because there's oftentimes time for that to happen during recruitment after that person has been selected for you to, reach out to them and make sure that you have the chance to share the things that you want to share with them.
Great, thank you. Candy, we'll now take the question that was on the phone.
Thank you. And again, as a reminder for others, it's *1 for questions. We have Yesenia Garcia. Your line is open.
Well, the webinar, the event center video kept stopping, and I had to redo it, and it kept telling me to report the program, but I kept putting wait for the program to continue. So that's something, I don't know if it's coming from my end or if it's you guys.
Well, we'll certainly take a look at that, and we will, as we said, post the webinar and the recording on the Vista campus in about a week. So if there's any part that you missed, you'll be able to get it from there. But did you have a specific question for our panelists today?
No, not at all. I just wanted to say this in case anybody else was having the same problem.
Thank you. No, we appreciate that, and we'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, I see there's a quick question about Vista leaders. Judy was saying there was 18 years between my terms of service, and I went to a new organization. So how can I get more support when you are the only Vista leader in the state of Oklahoma? I know as a Vista program we have, I think it's around 250 Vista leaders across the country, but I didn't know if you had any idea for this Vista leader or anyone else who can get support if they're the only Vista leader in their area or in their state.
For sure, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that's something that would be very real because I know that as a Vista leader this year, something that's been really helpful to me is to be part of a group of Vista leaders in my area, and then to be able to take advantage of their knowledge and their connections and their experiences to kind of guide my service as a Vista leader. So I think that if that isn't available to you, then I would really lean on kind of the broader community of National Service Vista leaders across the country. And if you have any connections to folks that you may have gone to any like prep training for, because I know that Vista leaders go to like their own, essentially the PSO for Vista leaders, it can be really useful to reach out to any of those folks that you have any connections with, whether that's over Facebook or over email or phone call, anyone that you may have met. Even if they're serving maybe far away from you, it can be really useful to talk to them about the experiences that you're having, because this is what I've found, is that any challenge that we experience in service, it's not new. Someone else has been there, someone else has experienced it. Oftentimes many people have, and that's true for serving as a Vista leader as well. And like when we had challenges during this year when I was serving as a Vista leader, I would talk to the other Vista leaders and they'd say, yeah, we're having the same thing. So it can be really helpful to make sure that you take advantage of that broader network of national service folks that you may have connected to, other Vista leaders you may have connected to, whether that's like over a Facebook group or some Vista leaders you may have Facebook friended, or just to call them or shoot them an email. And then also to really take advantage of the resources that are provided by AmeriCorps Vista to all of us, and to really take advantage of like the online forums that we have access to, and to really take advantage of those and be proactive about reaching out for support through those venues. I think that can be really helpful as well.
Great answer. Thank you. And before I go back to the phones, Mal, there's a question that I think you did a really good job answering or commenting on earlier, and it relates to, from Nicholas. In the chat section, there were several Vistas that mentioned documenting everything that you do during your year of service. So what are some good examples of things that should be documented? Can you give some insight? I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, Mal.
Yes, I could add some to that. I think for me, like when I first started my Vista term, I had a really hard time with that too. And so I think what I ended up doing was kind of documenting every important thing that I did. And so, for example, you know, one of the first things that I did was the community needs assessment. And so I kind of wrote down like my whole process. I kept a list of people that I reached out to, who I talked to, which organizations were of interest to my site and whatnot. But I think like overall, like I would recommend kind of looking at your VAD and just seeing like what your project goals are and what are some of the activities that are kind of a focus of your project, and kind of going off of that. For mine, in my VAD, some of the more important aspects of it was program planning and outreaches. And so I think that kind of helped to guide me in, you know, documenting things that I thought that would be of most importance. And so when I had outreaches or when I was planning programs, those are definitely the things that I tried to make sure that I documented the most of and that I had the most information about. Just so that way, you know, if there was a Vista that came after me or if I was leaving it for the organization staff, they'd be able to look at it and just have a good idea of what like my process was and how I went about reaching out to and coordinating outreaches.
And I would just simply add, from my experience, the only thing Mal did a great job touching on that is sometimes, Nicholas, there are things that need to be documented, such as you might have a phone conversation with someone and you verbally agree that you will do one thing and the other person will do the other thing. Even if you send a follow-up email to quote-unquote document that conversation, at least it's there, so if 2 weeks down the road you forget or the other person forgets what you talked about, it's documented, and it might just need to be temporary documentation, but as Mal said, there's a lot of other things that you can think of. I think in the grand scheme of things, it never hurts to document just about everything. I mean, there's some things you don't need to, but at least that way, if you don't need it later, you can delete it. But you can't really go back to it if you never documented it in the first place.
And just,
sorry,
just to add on to that too, I think that's really important, and especially with like phone conversations. And so like I took a lot of notes, and I kept like a to-do list, and I had like debriefs of like conversations I had and important things I had going on, and all of that really helps to kind of document things that you're working on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Candy, do we have any more questions on the phone?
We're showing no questions. Again, as a reminder, parties may press *1.
So I see 2 more questions in the Q&A, and if you do have any, we'll be here for just a couple more minutes, but we'll answer those 2 questions and we'll start to wrap up. So one question is, have either of you, Sam or Mal, ever been contacted by a former organization after completing a Vista term or switching to a new organization, and that maybe the organization was asking you for help or requesting advice with some of the materials that you left behind? Since we talk about sustainability, and even though you as the Vista might have left your organization, and Sam, I know you said you transferred organizations, did that organization that you left ever follow up with you weeks or months afterwards to say, hey, can you explain how this works, or we need your input or advice?
And we're showing no questions from the phone at this time.
Great, thank you. Sam, do you have any experience from the organization that you left as a Vista before you moved to a different agency as a Vista leader, in terms of did they contact you to request advice or things from materials you left behind?
It's so funny because now that I think back on that, I think there actually was one situation where a staff member reached out to me, I think it may have been months after I resolved my first service term, to ask with some sort of help with a government, it was a government grant system. It's a very complex system that we learned how to navigate when I was in service, and they kind of followed up with me after I was gone to ask for some guidance of what we had learned, how to use that grant system that the government has. But that's the only example I can think of. I think my primary experience is that no, once I finish my service terms, typically it gets transferred to the folks, and at that point it's in good hands, and you know that the work that you put in is moving forward. So that's the only example I can think of where that did happen.
And Mal, how about you? Have you been contacted by a formal organization to ask for advice or input from something you left behind?
You know, I've never been contacted, but I have been in that situation before where I've reached out to the Vista before me. And, you know, it was really helpful during the beginning of my service just being able to reach out and have a conversation with the Vista before me and just kind of talk and get a better understanding of it. So I'd say, I think overall, most Vistas are very open to meeting whoever's replacing them. And like Sam stressed about, you know, going out for coffee or just meeting to talk about the project overall and their experiences. I did the same thing. I was able to meet with the Vista before me, and, you know, we met and we talked about her experiences with her project, and she gave me the great tips and things that I should really focus on. So it was really helpful. So I'd say that, you know, if you have a way of reaching out to the Vista before you, I would highly recommend it, because they're a great resource to reach out to, and, you know, they probably have a better understanding of what you're going through compared to just Vistas overall. So
very, very true. And I'll answer this last question that came in. There's a lot to it, but it's a good one. It comes from Artelise, and it's how do you work with the organization to help them understand the flexibility of a VAD and how it too can change with the programs and circumstances? The short answer is obviously the Vista supervisor is typically the person who writes the VAD based on community input and community needs. So first, it would be checking with your supervisor to see if the supervisor has already had a recent conversation with the community about what the needs are and what changes. But if you are the Vista member and you see that the programs and circumstances change, but the organization doesn't seem to be flexible with the VAD, again, in addition to your supervisor, be in communication with your state office, because they're the ones who officially approve the VAD. But it is okay in your meeting as a Vista with the supervisor to remind them that the VAD can change a little bit over time. It shouldn't be changing once a month or once a week. But there are times where significant programs are added or things get deleted, and reminding them that just like things around poverty, which is the heart of Vista, things around poverty change, things around the community change, the VAD as well can change, but it has to be a conversation first with the Vista and supervisor around what the change request is. Then it ultimately has to be approved by the state office to make sure that it still falls in alignment with the Vista program and the mission of the Vista program. Certainly if you have additional questions about that, you can email me, but that's kind of the general overview without knowing too many specifics about the VAD and the details around sustainability. And seeing no additional questions.
And we do have a final question from the phone, if you'd like to take that.
Sure.
Thank you. Brenda Burkhalter, your line is open.
I would like to know, in dealing with literacy in this program, which is a small community effort here in Kansas, I'm unaware of all of the formalities needed to fundraise, which is what I have volunteered to progress in. Are there going to be activities through VistaCorps that will assist me in learning those particulars to enhance the program of fundraising? I'm not familiar with grant writing. However, I'm willing to learn all of those particulars. How do I do that or go about that?
So this is Eric, and I will start the answer, and then I'll pass it up to Mal and Sam, because I think they have a little bit of experience with grant writing as well. But in terms of the VISTA program as a whole, yes, there are some resources. First, you mentioned that you're in a small community, so definitely consult with your supervisor and the community, because there might be specific organizations that they choose to solicit funds from or not from based on the needs, because writing grants can be very specific to your organization and what you're trying to get money for. But in terms of the VISTA program, first, as you know, the vistacampus.gov is the website for all of the personal and professional development and continuing learning. There are a couple of things you can look at. We have had a couple of webinars on grant writing and fundraising, so if you go to vistacampus.gov and click on the webinars page, you'll be able to search and find any resources and materials we have on that. Second, depending on how far you are into your service, we do have a specific free online course. It's about a 10-week course specifically on resource development focused on grant writing. Space is limited, so you'd have to apply, but again, it's free. I think the next round of courses is slated to open sometime this fall, but for anyone who really needs a very concrete overview and specific steps as to how to raise funds, how to develop resources, I would strongly recommend applying for that course. Again, it's on vistacampus.gov. And then finally, before I pass it off to Mao and Sam, most of the resources that we've received or developed over the years from VISTA members, from VISTA leaders, from supervisors on the VISTA campus does touch on many aspects such as grant writing, because a lot of our VISTAs either do it directly or are very involved with it. So in addition to what's on the campus, of course, you can always search the internet, but oftentimes your supervisor or someone at the agency who might be in fundraising development or someone nearby might have other tips and tools and tricks that they've used in that region around what the best strategy is. And Sam, I'll first turn it over to you and then to Mao. What experience do you have with grant writing and how to offer assistance to someone who might need to do a lot of it for their year of service?
For sure. My first thought is coming from the brain of a VISTA leader. It's that if one of my VISTAs were to be taking on a development role or a fundraising role or grant writing role with limited support, that's a tough job, and that's a lot of very complex piece, and there's a lot of interrelation with like the organization you're serving with to do like fundraising for them, because a lot of times it's about developing relationships, and then if you're transferring out at the end of your service term, how are you transferring those relationships? If you're requesting money, is there really programming in place that will be able to use the money? So this is, as Eric said, I think this is very much one where the more support you have, the better. And then the more folks you can connect with, the better. And then if you do find that you're kind of on your own here and that you've taken on this kind of side of service and don't really necessarily have that kind of direct support and guidance from your program, your site supervisor or any staff there, I would really just kind of look around in your local area and find any networks that are present for maybe fundraising professionals to get together. Maybe there are opportunities to meet with folks who do this, who would be able to offer support and guidance to you, as Eric said. But I would just stress that fundraising work can be complicated, particularly given the amount of knowledge and connection you need to the organization. So the more support you can get, the better, and the more guidance and direction you can get, the better. I would be a little bit leery of any of my VISTAs, for example, doing this kind of work without any direction. So I wouldn't feel like you have to have all the answers yourself, because you aren't supposed to have all the answers yourself as a VISTA. This is about collaboration. This is about having support. But if there are networks available, I really encourage you to look for them and find those.
Excellent point, Sam. And Mao, did you have any insight into grant writing?
No, I don't. During my years of service, grant writing and fundraising wasn't really a huge part of what I did, so I don't really have too much experience in it. But, with what Sam and Eric said, there are really great resources through the Vista campus that, you can definitely take advantage of.
Okay.
Candy, are there any final questions as we move to a close?
We're showing no questions at this time.
Well, we appreciate all of your support on this webinar. We're going to move to the final slide and say thank you for your participation. We know that many of you have been on several webinars and might want to join us in future webinars. So we do have an upcoming webinar, excuse me, and it is titled Managing Up, Navigating the Vista Supervisor Relationship, which I was actually talking to another Vista about earlier today about how supervisors are here to supervise and manage you, but you as an adult, as an individual, as a Vista member, also might need to manage up and explain to your supervisor what needs and support you need in order to succeed. So it's a really, really good webinar, August 2nd, 2018. And if anything like that changes or if there's any updates, obviously the information will be on the Vista Campus webinars page. But we again want to thank you very much for your participation. Thank you especially to our guest speakers, Sam and Mal, for their great insight and their continued service to all the things they do. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.